Okay, today we want to just cover the Paris Agreement very quickly on climate change and really show the difference between the trends and everything, temperature, emissions, the statements of intent that were taken to Paris, and then the communique that came out that said where they'd actually really like to take us. Because you'll see there's big gaps between it all. So let's look at, firstly, the trends. And so we'll deal with temperature first, world temperature, and they're saying that once you get above 2 degrees, then you're into this concept of dangerous climate change, unpredictable effects from climate change. Where are we, and it's 2 degrees from pre-industrial levels. So where are we now, 2015? Well, it happens that we're just, and this is, over the months, we only got to October, we're just above 1 degree at the moment of warming since pre-industrial times. So that is actually a new record. The previous 6 years, previous 6 hottest years have all been below 1 degree. So we've just popped over halfway. When were we 0.5? How long has it taken us to do that? Well, 0.5 was actually in 1980. So it's taken us, whatever this is, 1880, something like that, 100 years to get the first half degree, and then only 35 to get the second half. And what we notice is these trends are accelerating. So, being conservative, business as usual would say that we'd be at 1.5 degrees by, what are we here, 2015, so add another 35 years by 2050, and we'd be at the 2 degree dangerous thing by 2085. So, if we just look at the historical information and the historical trends, then this looks a very tall order to stop this business by at 1.5 degrees. So that's what the historical record on temperature change tells us. Now we'll look at emissions. Now what matters here in terms of this temperature track going forward is what we do with our emissions. So let's look historically first. What have our emissions been doing? What's the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere been doing? Well, it's been increasing actually. So if we go CO2 concentration, parts per million, over the years it's been increasing at an increasing rate. So if you look at the sort of changes back in the 70s, let's say we were doing this sort of thing per annum, in terms of the change. Now we're up here per annum. Now last year actually was the first year that we had constant emissions, despite the world growing. And I suspect that was due to the fact that the nature of world growth changed last year, and China, which is the biggest emitter, wasn't going anywhere near as fast, and that growth slack was picked up a little by other countries that are less carbon intensive. So all I'm saying really here is that there's no sign in the or very little sign in the historical data that we are actually on top of this emissions thing. And until we get on top of that, we cannot expect the rate of temperature increase to slow down. So that's what Paris was about. Everybody went to Paris with their undertakings, voluntary undertakings of what they would do. Remember, ours was 11%. We'd cut emissions by 11% from 1990 levels. The US commitment was somewhere between 12 and 19% from 1990 levels. So New Zealand really hasn't been that flash in terms of what we've offered. If we look at our historical track of emissions, in fact, that we've increased markedly since 1990. So we've actually done bugger all. All we've done is buy cheap, actually quite dodgy, fraudulent credits from offshore, actually, to satisfy the Kyoto undertaking. So we have a long way to go to get on this train, and that's why the Prime Minister's saying, the costs are terrible, so on and so forth. Now we've addressed all that, and he's wrong on that. It's very selective statistics that he's using. So now let's look then in terms of where we have to go to make 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, whichever one, a certainty. So the issue, remember, is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Just try, you've got only so much you can put up there because the stuff never goes away. So much you can put up there before the temperature rise is guaranteed. So if we're talking about 1.5 degrees, which is, now why did they come up to 1.5 degrees? Why did they come up with that at Paris? Because all the evidence we see, as more and more science comes through, is in fact that 2 degrees could be too much in terms of dangerous climate change. That the sea level rise in particular is, could well be greater than the scientists had anticipated. So the closer we get to this and the more science is done, the actual perception of this stuff is getting worse, not better. So, you know, it's miles away from where the politicians' heads really have been. So, in order for the 1.5 degrees, 3 trillion tonnes up there in the atmosphere of CO2. We've already put 2 up, so we've only got 1 left for 1.5 degrees to be a certainty. 2, if you like, 2 left if we were happy with 2 degrees, but 1.5 is really what the science is really telling us now. Now, there's 6-7 billion people in the world. So if you were to divide this up on a per capita basis, then at our current rate of emissions, New Zealand I'm talking about, we have 9 years left for our contribution to 1.5 before we must stop contributing at all. Or, you know, you can double that if it's 2 degrees. Now, of course, all I've done there is divide it by the population number, and then look at how much we emit now. We are a high emitter. That's why we've got bugger all left in terms of that. But if you were looking at this on any sort of equitable basis, looking at the developed countries actually making a contribution and allowing more headroom for the less developed countries to use up this 1 trillion that we've got left, we'd have a hell of a lot less than 9 years left. So you can see the issue here. New Zealand actually is on the wrong side of the ledger in terms of emissions. It's got, you know, we are a high emitter. And the bar's been raised here in terms of getting the amount of carbon dioxide up there, you know, capping it. So we're really hard up against it. So I can't really see how the Prime Minister or Tim Grosser, the recently retired Minister of whatever it is, climate change, how they can say, and without grinning, well, we don't really have to do too much. Yeah, I just don't get that argument. You know, it's just not backed up by the data. Think about that.